Now this very solemn chapter and chapter 14 are, as Isaiah says, the burden of Babylon, the warning of judgment against Babylon. There is, in some measure, a broader warning as he speaks of judging the world, but it is in the context of judging Babylon. It is a remarkable prophecy in that Babylon was not significant, not the foremost power at the time of Isaiah's giving of this prophecy. We're told in chapter 14 it was in the year that Ahaz died, so we can date it precisely. And it was some 96 years before Assyria would be overthrown by the Babylonians, and Babylon would then be the foremost power in the Near East. And again, yet longer before Babylon would, some 20 or 30 years before, Nebuchadnezzar would come and take Jerusalem and then in the three stages take people into exile. And at which point Babylon was a very great city. One could at length describe it, but there were 56 miles of these thick walls that a chariot could go along, many brass gates, obviously the Hanging Gardens, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and yet 96 years before its supremacy, here the Lord through Isaiah is giving notice that it will be judged, and most solemnly judged, and it would be on account of their oppression of the Lord's people. In the first verses of chapter 14, we'll come on to it, he gives the reason that the Lord's people would be set free, and Babylon obviously then being the oppressor to them. But it is very clear, it is very plain, and all wonderfully fulfilled. The last portion of this chapter, speaking of how desolate it will be, it shall never be inhabited, verse 20, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there. And it was even, I think, by some of the critics in the 19th century, questioned again, as they questioned so many things, did Babylon exist? Had it existed? Because there was no sign of it then. But their skepticism was the fulfillment of this prophecy, that there was nothing left. And though it was not overthrown immediately, not totally destroyed immediately by the Medes, but over a number of successive years and generations, and after the Greeks and Alexander had come, eventually it became for many centuries as this, not inhabited in any way, not even for the Bedouin, the Arabians, the Arabs to pitch their tent there. But I'll try and go through fairly swiftly. I'd like to cover both these chapters, if possible. I won't cover every detail, but hopefully enough to grant a reasonable understanding of what the chapter is about, what the chapters are about. And it begins first from verses 2, I think, through to 8. The judgment is to be proclaimed. Lift ye up a banner upon the high mountain, exalt the voice unto them, shake the hand, that they may go into the gates of the nobles. It will come, and they are to, as it were, lift ye up the banner, lift the army banner, there go to conquer. I have commanded my sanctified ones, not meaning, I believe, the Jews, but those set apart, the Medes set apart for this work. I have also called my mighty ones for mine anger, even them that rejoice in my highness. And the noise of a multitude in the mountains, like as of a great people, possibly referring to the Medes being from the mountains. And them, they come from a far country, coming to take Babylon. And the picture, very plain, of this army coming intent upon overthrowing the city. And that verse 6, howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. This judgment is from the Lord. It is the day of the Lord. I don't believe it refers, though you might apply it to the great day of the Lord, when the Lord returns, but it is in one sense a mini day of the Lord, reckoning, judgment for Babylon. They have been wicked, they have been cruel to the people of God, overthrown the temple and so on. Now is their reckoning. And howl ye, because it will be grievous. Therefore shall all the hands be faint, and every man's heart shall melt. And they shall be afraid, pangs and sorrows shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth. They shall be amazed one at another, their faces shall be as flames. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh. And in one sense, truly the day of the Lord will come. And one might take this and apply it to the world as a whole, that one day the ungodly world shall be judged, and the cruelty that they have shown to the people of God will be one day repaid. But here it is in particular to Babylon. And all the imagery from verse 10 of the stars of the heaven, the constellations and so on, the sun shall be darkened, I think, referring to that the whole fabric of Babylonian society and rule will be no more. The sun, maybe the king, is overthrown, as happened as Belshazzar, the regent in Babylon, was taken and killed, and the Medes totally replaced the hierarchy and what was there. But the Lord will bring people to judgment. Verse 11, I will punish the world for their evil and the wicked for their iniquity, and I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a man more precious than fine gold, even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir, meaning, I think, so many will be slain that those who are left will be very precious. But again, it is speaking of Babylon, but may likewise apply more broadly to the world, the ungodly world, on the day of judgment. And all these images, very solemn, very terrible, as Babylon had done to the nations and Jerusalem and Judah, as they had cruelly treated them in their conquest, so it would be returned to them. And the Medes specifically mentioned, verse 17, behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. And it will be brought down, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And these very mournful images of a place desolate, and of the wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there, and so on. And dragons, sometimes, just an aside, The modern translations scorn the use of dragons, but those of you who know little about what the creation science movement says about dragons, that maybe it refers to dinosaurs, and here Babylon might be a place where the remaining dinosaurs might have congregated far away from people, safe from hunting. But it will, it says, her time is near to come and her days shall not be prolonged. It will most certainly come. And as we know, Babylon was not very long in its ascendancy. The Jews were 70 years in exile, and then it was cut off, never again to rise. And very brief, really time of significant power and rule. But chapter 14 dwells more with the reasons why it would be so, and precious encouragement for the Lord's people. Verse 1, for the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land. And the stranger shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place. And the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord, for servants and handmaids, and they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. And it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. That the Lord will do this to Babylon for his people's sake, for the relatively small number of Jewish exiles there, taken into slavery, oppressed there, but they would be set free. The Lord saw, and the Lord would have mercy, will have mercy, and will return them to the land of the Lord, and would give them rest from their sorrow and their fear and the hard bondage wherein they were made to serve. And it's of great encouragement to the Lord's people in every generation, and particularly those who are hard pressed by the world, those persecuted, and one might say somewhere like North Korea or China now. The Lord sees, the Lord knows, the Lord will deliver his people, though for a while they may be tried, yet for their sakes he will overthrow their oppressors. And obviously we must pray and labour for such things, but we dare not say we haven't seen it, because with the demise of the Soviet Union and the communist bloc, many of the Lord's people set free, and their suffering very great at times. And you read books like Tortured for Christ by Richard Wurmbrand, or there's one more recently came out about a Russian brother. I'll get the name, the title wrong, but a little cost, something along those lines, a small price to pay. But grievous, their suffering was great, but the Lord knew, and the Lord did ultimately overthrow their oppressors much mightier than they, and delivered them. And in one way, though in the West we still have liberty, yet we are burdened by all the ungodliness, and we cannot we have no power really to overthrow it, but the Lord is able, and the Lord has all these things in mind, and will ultimately judge the world and bring these things to cease. And we may humbly and simply have our trust in him. But he goes on further, more warnings. Verse 4, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased, the golden city ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. It's as if it's those who see it being amazed and in one sense rejoicing that their power, the power of Babylon, is broken. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet, because Babylon is fallen. They break forth into singing, because the conqueror, mighty conqueror, is no more. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, Babylon is no more. No feller is come up against us, none to chop down the trees, none to conquer, none to take the nations captive. And speaking of hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming, to, as it were, take Babylon down into hell, and not sort of mocking, but very strong words. Verse 10, all they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as us, as we? Art thou become like unto us? And so on. And then this verse 12, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Now I know, let me read verse 13. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. That I'm sure this is addressed to Babylon. O Lucifer, O child of light, great city, yet to be cut down, but it is comparing it to Lucifer, to a fallen angel. That here's this great one who sadly fell through pride, through saying he would ascend into heaven and be above the stars of God and so on, rival God. I will be like the Most High. And Babylon in the same way, acted in the same way, exalting herself above the Lord, or trying to, and ultimately suffering the same end as the devil. And it's surprising how these things return time after time. I tend to think, and I know there are differing opinions, and I'm not dogmatic on it by any means, that Babylon in the New Testament, in Revelation, does refer preeminently to the Roman Catholic Church. Spurgeon says, and I know this is not irrefutable evidence, he says in Morning and Evening, he says if you were to give Scotland Yard Revelation 17, it wouldn't take them long to arrest the Roman Catholic Church. But I don't believe it's the world, because it is something as part of the world. But I don't believe it's just the Roman Catholic Church. I think it is all false religion, in particular false Christianity, because one cannot blame the Roman Catholics for all false Christianity. Sadly, there is much, much more. And but it says mother of harlots and so on. But and it in some ways is the great enemy of the gospel, the opposite of the gospel. Charles Hodge, the great theologian, said it was very useful to have the Roman Catholic Church, and you see it in his systematic theology, because they have the opposite view to what is right so often in their own theology, in their own doctrine, and he will contrast it to show what he believes to be true. And here, but these words put in Babylon's mouth, or ultimately in the devil's mouth, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High. And is it not, this is the saying of false religion, generation after generation, the New Age movement, that's what it is. You shall be as God, your own gods. Even now that the Word Faith movement, the great thing, you will be as gods. Is it Psalm 82 that is often quoted? And you are little gods. You can do miracles as Jesus did, and so on. It is the same thing, but it is the same lie as spoken by the devil to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Ye shall be as gods. And this was Babylon's fall, but this is the fall of many in every generation. One might say also even atheists, they are just seeking to take God's rule and do whatever they want and throw off the rule of God and be, as it were, gods themselves. But this is what Babylon was to be judged for, and all who take such a line will ultimately be brought down by the Lord. I was reading, now it's a quite broad thing, the what is called progressive Christianity, a sort of pick and mix Christianity, quite popular in America, but I'm sure amongst many of the churches here, that yes, we believe in Jesus, but we're not going to take seriously the scriptures and the commands of God. We will sort of pick what we want. And it was related in an article in the Washington Times saying this is so much what is now seen in the American churches. And they called it MTD, moral, therapeutic, and deist. And the moralist perspective is we're here to be good people and to try to do good. But, and this is not in the article, obviously not in accordance with the Lord's word. That's really what life is about. I'll be good to you, you be good to me, it'll all work out. The therapeutic aspect is everything is supposed to be geared to making me feel good about myself, ultimately to make me happy. And deism, the old idea, deism is the idea that God created the world but has no direct involvement in it. Basically, according to MTD, there is a distant God who just wants everyone to be nice, and the purpose of life is to be happy. And it's not about confessing the Lord, it is about comfort and counselling. Meaning, and it's not quite said here, that we're not going to bother with what the Lord says about homosexuality and these matters, serious commands of God. We're just going to do what we want, but with a veneer of Christianity upon it. But it's really no different, and no humbling, no simple trusting in the Lord for forgiveness and pardon, but rather a turning away from the Lord. But Isaiah sets these things forward, warns them. He goes on. We come down to verse, he says in a way the same as before, warning of the judgment. And verse 23, I will also make it a possession for the bittern and pools of water, and will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts, or the broom of destruction. The bittern, as you know, a marsh bird, just reeds and marsh, empty, desolate place. And the warning, verse 24, the Lord of hosts hath sworn, saying, surely, as I have thought, so shall it come to pass, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand. It shall come to pass. And though Babylon would rise and be very great and very mighty and overthrow Judah and Jerusalem, yet the Lord's word would stand and would come to pass. He goes on to warn them that Babylon would overthrow both Assyria and Palestina, the Philistines and others, but that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him under foot. Then his yoke shall depart off them, and his burden depart from off their shoulders. This is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth. This is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. For the Lord of hosts hath purposed, and who shall disannul it? And his hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back? In the year that King Ahaz died was this burden. The Lord purposed that Assyria's yoke would be broken, Babylon would break it, but also he goes on to warn of how Babylon would destroy the Philistines and others. Rejoice not thou, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken, the Assyrians. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. And that they would be judged and punished by the Babylonians after the Assyrians. But then we have the last verse, a beautiful, comforting verse for the Lord's people. What shall one then answer the messengers of the nation? That the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. Though there are all these tumult of nations, Assyria falling, Babylon rising, Babylon then being conquered, that what abides? Zion, the Lord's people. The Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it, trust in the Lord and in his keeping of his people. And the Jews, though small, yet preserved and kept, and the godly trusting the Lord in it, and the Lord's hand upon them, his eye upon them, never suffering them to be left and destroyed, and the Lord founding it and keeping it. And the same for his church. And there are times, many times in church history, you read of the church being truly a little flock, not the established church, but and often grievously troubled, but the Lord had founded it, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. There's an interesting book called The Reformers and Their Stepchildren that speaks of those present, certainly in this country, I think in much of Europe, before the Reformation, those in this country known as the Lollards, the followers of John Wycliffe, who were in many ways secret believers, not totally secret, because they were, if they were arrested and tried, they would confess the Lord, but their meetings would be discreet and so on, but the Lord's people. And when obviously the Reformation came with a more public acceptance of the doctrines of grace and the Word of God, they were there to embrace and to encourage and to do all they could to further the work of the Lord. But this presence of what one might call, what others have called a pilgrim church, not very visible because they were persecuted, but nonetheless there. And here, in one sense, I believe a picture of it, as the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. He will have his true people. He will have his genuine believers. And though they are in difficulty, yet they are the Lord's, and they will trust in the Lord, and the Lord will deliver them. And he will overthrow their enemies, the Babylons of this world, and he will take note of his people. And though small, yet he will hear and he will bless. And ultimately, the Lord obviously will return, and the world as a whole will be judged, and the Lord's people will be with him forever, and his purpose shall stand. So although it's solemn chapters, we should not be overly discouraged by it, but rather that the Lord takes note and has the church's enemies, if they will not repent. Certainly we must seek to win as many as we can, to graciously plead and pray for, and do all that we can to win souls, and that they would be delivered. But ultimately the Lord must return, the day of the Lord must come and deliver his people and overthrow their enemies. And may he help us in these days not to be troubled, to be disturbed. In one sense, it's very right to be sorrowful at the wickedness of the world and all that goes on, but not to lose heart, not to grow weary, not to let our love for the Lord grow cold, but ever to trust in him and in his goodness and almighty power.